The message came through just as Sophie's fingers found the right balance between grace and hesitation. Sold your piano for $500. We need the money. Don't make a scene about it. Jake. For a full 10 seconds I forgot how to breathe. The sound of Bach blurred into a single trembling note. Sophie glanced up, her face all concern. Ms. Hartwell? Are you okay? I forced a smile that didn't belong to me. Let's fix that left-hand phrasing again, I said, though my ears rang too loud to hear her play. Somewhere in my parents' house, the piano that had carried 3 generations of Hartwells was gone, its ivory keys silent, its soul sold for $500. Mornings in my apartment always began with sound. Not alarm clocks or traffic, but the soft hum of the kettle and the slow rise of piano notes through the walls, scales, arpeggios, hesitant melodies from my students practicing what I'd assigned the week before. It was a comforting chaos, a reminder that my work meant something. By 8:30, I'd be sitting at my own upright, a modest Yamaha covered in sheet music and coffee rings, tracing old pieces with my fingertips before lessons began. I'd whisper the same advice my grandfather once gave me when I was 6. Every key tells a truth, Emma. Listen long enough, and it will tell yours. I didn't realize then that truth could be taken from you. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom, thin walls, a balcony just wide enough for 2 flower pots. But every inch of it felt earned. I'd built a steady life teaching music at the local arts center and taking private students in the evenings. My brother Jake always said I was wasting my talent on other people's kids. But teaching had saved me after our parents' house became too full of grief and noise. After Grandpa's passing, it had been the only thing that made sense. The Steinway, his Steinway, had been my tether. A 1925 Model M, deep brown mahogany, its keys yellowed with age but pure under the fingertips. I'd started restoring it myself 3 years ago. Every Sunday, I'd drive to my parents' house with a small toolkit, cotton gloves, and a notebook of restoration notes. It wasn't just a project. It was communion between memory and sound, past and present. Jake never cared for it. He called it the old furniture, said it made the living room look outdated. When I told him it was worth more than their car, he'd laughed. Then maybe you should sell it and finally move out of that shoebox. I'd learned to let his words slide past me. Jake had always been that way, loud, impatient, allergic to stillness. He had a marketing job that paid well enough for him to believe he was the smarter sibling. Our parents adored his confidence, mistaking it for competence. When he spoke, people listened. When I did, it sounded like background music. But in music, I had something he'd never understand: reverence. I could close my eyes and feel time bending, as if every note were a thread connecting me to my grandfather's quiet devotion. He'd taught me scales before I could read properly. He used to place a single sugar cube on the edge of the piano and say, "One for each song you play with heart." That Steinway had been his pride. A war survivor. A gift from a maestro he once tuned for. When he passed, he left it to me. Not to the family. To me. Written clearly in his will. And yet, it sat in my parents' living room all this time. Too large for my apartment, too precious to move without the right conditions. I'd been saving to transport it safely, making plans with a restoration expert in Boston who understood its worth. And then today a text. A single careless message. Sold your piano for $500, we need the money. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Instead, I finished Sophie's lesson, smiled when she left, and locked the door behind her. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was absence, heavy, echoing, final. I sat at my own piano, pressed middle C, and waited for the sound to fade. Did too quickly. The first time Jake mentioned money, it was spring. 3 months after Grandpa's funeral. I remember the kitchen light flickering over a half-eaten cake and paper plates, the smell of coffee turning bitter in the pot. We could sell some of his old stuff, Jake said, his voice casual but sharp. Mom doesn't even use half this furniture. That piano alone isn't furniture, I cut in. He smirked. Relax, Emma. I'm just saying sentiment doesn't pay bills. Back then I'd laughed it off. He'd always been quick to talk about value like it was something you could appraise in dollars. He'd never sat up nights listening to Grandpa play Chopin until dawn. He hadn't seen the way the old man's hands trembled on the last night of his life, reaching for a final chord he couldn't quite finish. But Jake had an ability, one I envied once, to make wrong things sound reasonable. He talked about family needs, about fairness, about helping mom and dad. And when you said no to Jake, he had a way of making you feel selfish for protecting what was yours. It started small. He'd borrow tools from my restoration kit and forget to return them. He'd make minor repairs around the house that always seemed to make things worse. Then one weekend, I arrived to find a scratch running along the Steinway's lid, deep, fresh, like a wound. "What happened?" I asked. Jake shrugged. "Delivery guy bumped into it. Not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" My hands shook as I ran my fingers over the dent. He sighed, exasperated. "Emma, it's just a piano." No, it was never just anything. It was years of memory varnished into wood. The smell of shellac and polish, the whisper of cloth on ivory. I'd written my first song on that piano. Grandpa had played his last on it. Still, I told myself it was an accident. Families forgive accidents. The second betrayal came wrapped in false kindness. 2 years ago, I'd lost a small teaching contract when the Arts Center cut funding. Jake offered to help with finances if I agreed to let him manage the piano sale when I was ready. He said he knew collectors could get a fair deal. I'd laughed, told him I'd never sell it, not for any price. He'd smiled, slow and calculating. "Everyone has a price, sis. You just haven't found yours yet." That should have been my warning. But families run on invisible strings: obligation, love, guilt. I kept showing up every Sunday, kept sanding and tuning and cleaning that piano, pretending we were still a family that understood each other. Sometimes Mom would bring tea and sit beside me, eyes glazed with memory. "He loved hearing you play," she'd whisper. "You sound just like him." I think that's the only reason I didn't move the piano sooner. I wanted them to feel his presence in the house a little longer. I wanted to believe Jake would respect that. Then came winter. Jake's business hit trouble. Something about bad investments, a client defaulting. He'd started visiting the house more, talking louder, staying longer. Once, I found him measuring the piano's dimensions on his phone. He said he was just curious. I remember standing in the doorway, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "Don't touch it," I'd said. "Come on, Emma," he replied. "You're overreacting." "No, I mean it. Don't." He'd smiled then, that smooth, practiced grin he used when he'd already decided something. I'd seen it before, when he convinced Dad to remortgage the house for his startup. It was the look of someone who knew how to make everyone else look unreasonable. The last time I saw the Steinway, it gleamed, newly polished, its brass pedals reflecting sunlight. I'd finished replacing a chipped ivory key, humming to myself. Jake walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee, unusually friendly. "Truce," he said, handing me one. "I know I can be a jerk sometimes." I took the cup uneasy. "You're not a jerk. Just impulsive." He grinned. "That's generous." We talked for an hour that day about Grandpa, about the past, about nothing important. It felt almost peaceful. I left believing maybe we'd turned a corner. And then today's message. "Sold your piano for $500. We need the money." The speed of it was what stunned me. The audacity. He hadn't even called. Just a text, like selling an heirloom was the same as ordering takeout. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon. The living room was emptier than I'd ever seen it. A faint square on the carpet marked where the piano had stood. The air smelled like dust and lemon polish, hollow without sound. Mom sat on the sofa, wringing her hands. "Jake said it was broken," she murmured, eyes down. "He said you gave permission." I stared at her. "You believed that?" She flinched. "He said you needed money." I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. It was never about money. The sound of the front door closing behind me was sharp, final, like the lid of a coffin. The house smelled the same as always. Furniture polish, lavender sachets, a faint undertone of coffee. But without the Steinway, it was air without lungs. Even the silence felt wrong, thin, stretched, like something was missing from the world's rhythm. I stood in the empty space where the piano had once lived. My hands hovered over the air where keys should have been. I could almost hear it, the faint ghost of the opening bars of Clair de Lune, the way Grandpa used to play them late at night. Now there was only the soft ticking of the wall clock and my mother's breathing. "Who bought it?" I asked. She looked up, startled, like she hadn't expected me to still be standing there. A man from the classifieds. Jake handled it. He said the man paid cash. Cash, I repeated, the word dry in my mouth. I didn't think you'd mind, she said too quickly. You weren't using it, dear. I almost laughed. Not using it? Mom, I was restoring it. Her lips trembled. Jake said you'd moved on. That was when I felt it, the flicker of something under my ribs. Not just hurt anymore, but heat. Cold, controlled anger, the kind that makes everything suddenly clear. I turned toward the door. Where are you going? She asked. To find Jake. For 3 nights, I didn't touch the piano in my apartment. I couldn't. Every key felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. Not just an instrument, but history. My hands hovered over the ivory and fell away, useless. I'd sit in silence, staring at the old framed photo on my bookshelf. Grandpa and me side by side on the Steinway bench. His smile soft, mine gap-toothed and proud. A sugar cube balanced on the lid. I could still hear him in my head. Music tells the truth you're afraid to say. Well, the truth now was that I'd been naive. I'd spent my whole life believing that family protected memory. That blood meant loyalty. That love would keep sacred things safe. But Jake had shattered that illusion with a single text message. On the 4th night, I stopped trying to sleep. I made tea instead, chamomile, though it did nothing to calm me, and sat at my kitchen table under the weak yellow light. Bills lay scattered across the surface. My laptop blinked with unanswered emails. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, no music left in her. Then, almost without thinking, I opened my notebook, the one I'd used during the Steinway restoration. Pages of careful sketches, notes about wood grain, polish types, serial numbers. My hand moved to the first page. Model M. Serial number 250893. 1925. Original lacquer finish, European ivory keys, minor dent on the right pedal casing. The number burned into my brain. It was the piano's fingerprint, and my proof. I turned to my laptop, typing the serial number into every online piano registry I could find. The hours blurred. Around 2 a.m., I found it listed on an old appraisal database valuation, $2,750,000, certified 2016 appraiser, L. Daniels. A dry laugh escaped my throat. Jake hadn't just been greedy. He'd been ignorant. He'd sold history for the price of a second-hand laptop. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart thudding slow and deliberate. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a lie, one that could ruin him if revealed. But revenge wasn't about destruction. Not for me. It had to be about truth. Still, I couldn't act yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what he'd done. The next morning, I went to see my parents again. Mom was watering the geraniums by the window, her hands trembling around the jug. She looked older, somehow smaller. Emma, she said softly, you shouldn't be angry with Jake. He was only trying to help. Help who, Mom? Himself. She flinched. He told me you didn't want it anymore. I swallowed the anger that rose in my throat. Did he tell you it was worth nearly $3 million? Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. 3 what? Appraised in 2016, I said evenly. He sold it for $500. The jug slipped from her hand, water spilling over her slippers. She didn't move. Oh dear God, she whispered. He wouldn't. But he would. He had. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I cleaned up the water with a towel, my motions slow, mechanical. When I looked up, Mom was crying. Quietly, like someone who'd realized too late that love can be blinding. Don't tell your father yet, she murmured. He won't believe it. I don't need him to, I said. I just need proof. That afternoon, I called every antique piano collector within 100 miles. It took hours before one of them recognized the serial number. Oh yes, the man said over the phone. That piece was quite famous in the appraisal circuit. If it's the same Model M, it's been displayed at the Providence Vintage Fair. One of only a handful still with original ivory keys. Would you happen to have any photos? I asked. I do, he said. It was in my catalog last year. Shall I email them? When the photos arrived, I opened them slowly, my fingers trembling. There it was, the same wood grain, the same slight dent on the right pedal casing. My grandfather's piano, polished and shining under bright exhibit lights. I felt something shift inside me then, a subtle, fierce calm. I wasn't powerless. Jake thought he'd sold a relic, but he'd actually created a trail. A public one. And trails could be followed. I printed the appraisal papers, the photographs, and Grandpa's will. Laid them out on the table like a composer setting out the first notes of a symphony. Each document was a measure. Each fact a chord. Each injustice a pause before the crescendo. And somewhere in all that silence I decided I wouldn't confront him yet. Not until the melody of truth was ready to play. And when it did, it would be loud enough for everyone to hear. That night, I finally sat at my own piano again. The keys were cool under my fingers, hesitant at first, then steady. I began to play something new. A minor waltz, slow and haunting. My revenge wasn't rage, it was rhythm. Precision. Patience. And as the melody unfolded, I realized something Grandpa had tried to teach me long ago. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just have to play in the right room. Revenge, I learned, isn't a single act. It's a series of quiet, deliberate notes, each one chosen, placed, and played with patience. The first note was documentation. I spent 3 evenings building a digital folder titled Hartwell Legacy. Inside, a scan of Grandpa's will naming me sole heir of the Steinway. The 2016 appraisal listing its multimillion-dollar value. A photograph of the serial number taken from my own restoration notes. The catalog photo from the Providence Vintage Fair. A screenshot of Jake's text message. Each piece was proof, and together they formed a melody no one could ignore. The second note was exposure. But not yet public, not until the timing was perfect. I needed leverage. 2 weeks passed before I saw Jake again. It was Sunday family dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a thick silence that even the smell of rosemary couldn't soften. My parents sat stiffly at the table, as if holding their breaths. Jake arrived late, as always, flashing his practiced grin. "Sorry, traffic," he said, kissing Mom's cheek and ignoring my eyes. What did I miss? I didn't answer. Neither did she. He filled the silence himself, chattering about work, new clients, an upcoming campaign for a luxury car brand. His voice was smooth, confident, like nothing had happened. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Jake, your sister tells us the piano you sold was quite valuable." Jake didn't flinch. "Oh, that old thing? It wasn't in good shape." Mom's hands twisted in her napkin. She said it was appraised for nearly $3 million. Jake's fork froze midair. For a second his face slipped, just a flicker, before he smiled again. "That's ridiculous. She must be mistaken." "I have documents," I said quietly. He turned to me, eyes hard. "Emma, stop making this dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself." I met his stare evenly. "Not yet." The room went still. Dad's hand paused over his plate. Jake's smile faltered again, but he recovered quickly, pushing back his chair. "Excuse me," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "I don't have to listen to this." He left the table. His footsteps faded down the hall, the front door slamming like a closing curtain. Mom started to cry again. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. All I could think about was that flicker, the one moment Jake had looked unsure. That was the first crack. The next day, I visited the local paper. Not the flashy city press, the small-town Weston Chronicle, the kind that thrived on community stories. I met with a reporter named Leah Turner, mid-30s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who noticed everything. I told her everything carefully, fact by fact. I showed her the documents, the appraisal, the will. I told her how my brother had sold a priceless instrument for pennies and lied about it to our parents. When I finished, she sat back and whistled softly. "That's something," she said. "You're not looking to sue?" "Not yet," I said. "I just want the truth known." She smiled slightly. "Well, truth is what I'm paid to write." She promised to reach out to the buyer, verify the details, and cross-check the appraisal. But she warned me, "If this goes public, it won't stay just about the piano. Your family name will be everywhere. Are you ready for that?" I hesitated and realized I was. "Yes," I said. "I am." 3 days later, Leah called. We confirmed it. The buyer, Mr. Porter, said he purchased the piano for $500 cash. He didn't know its value, but he's devastated. He's willing to go on record. My pulse quickened. What about the appraisal? Confirmed legitimate. And, Emma, I found something else. Your brother's company just filed for bankruptcy. Of course. That's why he sold it. Not for the family, not for our parents, but to plug the holes in his sinking ship. He used the money, I said quietly. Didn't he? Looks like it, Leah said. You still want me to run the story? Yes, I whispered. Play it in C minor. She didn't understand the reference, but she laughed softly. You'll want to buy a copy of tomorrow's paper. The article dropped at sunrise. Heirloom Steinway sold for $500 by family member. Appraised at $2.8 million. Jake's name wasn't in the headline, but the first paragraph spelled it out in black and white. The story spread fast, local gossip first, then regional outlets, then music blogs that cared more about heritage instruments than family drama. By noon, his company's website had been flooded with comments. By evening, his business partners had begun to distance themselves. He called me that night, voice hoarse with fury. What did you do? He shouted. I told the truth. You ruined me. You did that yourself. He exhaled, heavy, sharp. You think you've won? You've just humiliated our family. Do you know what people are saying? Yes, I said softly. They're saying the truth. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost satisfying. Then he hissed. You always were jealous. Grandpa loved you more, and now you're proving why. No, Jake, I said quietly. I'm proving that love doesn't mean letting someone lie. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, heart thudding slow but steady. The backlash was worse than I expected. Mom stopped answering my calls. Dad left a voicemail that began with, "How could you?" and ended with, "He's still your brother." Students' parents whispered when I entered the arts center. For a while, I couldn't walk through town without someone asking if the story was true. It was exhausting. Lonely. Some nights I questioned myself, wondered if I'd gone too far, if the cost of truth was too high. Then one evening a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. The Steinway, sitting in Mr. Porter's living room, restored and gleaming. On the back, in neat handwriting, "If you ever wish to play her again, my door is open. Some truths deserve to sing." I sat down, clutching the photo. There it was again, music waiting. Not lost. Just transferred. Still alive. And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about restoration. I hadn't ruined anything. I'd restored the truth, the way a restorer brings hidden shine back to old wood. Still, one final note remained to be played. Jake needed to face it. Not through headlines or rumors, but in person. And this time, I wouldn't whisper. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind that seemed permanently caught between rain and silence. Jake texted first. "We need to talk. Come to the house." I almost didn't go. But something in those words, not anger, not even pride, just weariness, pulled me there. When I arrived, the front door was open. The house smelled faintly of bourbon and dust. The lights were dim, blinds half drawn. I found him in the living room, sitting on the old leather couch, a half-empty glass in his hand. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes, once sharp, alive, looked dull, bloodshot. "So," he said, not looking up, "you got what you wanted." I didn't sit yet. "I didn't want this, Jake." He laughed short, bitter. "Didn't you? You exposed me. Everyone knows. Clients, friends, even Dad's golf buddies. I can't show my face anywhere. You stole from me," I said softly. "From us. From Grandpa's memory." He finally looked up. "I did it for the family." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You did it for yourself." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it's like to carry everything. The bills, the pressure, the expectations. You've always had the luxury of art and silence. I had to be the one who fixed things. By selling what didn't belong to you." He looked away. "It was just a piano." My heart clenched. It was never just a piano. It was his legacy. It was my inheritance. I caught my breath. It was the last piece of him I had. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of it. He poured another drink but didn't lift it to his lips. You think I don't feel that, he said. I wake up every day knowing I messed up. But you didn't have to destroy me for it. I didn't destroy you, I said quietly. I just stopped hiding what you did. He leaned back, eyes glassy. You sound just like Grandpa. Always lecturing, always so righteous. Grandpa taught me that truth is a form of mercy, I said. Even when it hurts. He laughed again, but softer this time. Mercy. You call this mercy? Yes, I said. Because I could have done worse. That made him finally look at me, really look. What do you mean? I could have pressed charges. I could have sued. But I didn't. Because I wanted you to face what you'd done, not run from it. His throat worked silent. For a moment, all I heard was the rain beginning outside, soft, hesitant drops tapping against the window pane. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. This, I said, placing it on the coffee table, is a copy of Grandpa's restoration notes. Every repair, every tuning, every handprint on that wood. It's proof of what you threw away, and what I'm rebuilding. He stared at the envelope like it was something alive. I found the buyer, I continued. He's restoring the piano. He offered to let me play it whenever I want. He doesn't blame you. But I think deep down you do. He swallowed hard. His fingers twitched toward the envelope but stopped. I didn't know it was worth that much, he murmured almost to himself. It was never about the money, I said. It was about value. You measure worth in dollars. Grandpa measured it in legacy. The rain thickened. The room dimmed further. I sat down finally, facing him, brother and sister, two ghosts of the same bloodline. I loved you, Jake, I said quietly. Still do. But love doesn't mean silence. His shoulders sagged. The glass slipped from his hand, landing softly on the rug. For the first time since we were kids, he looked small. Human. After a long silence, he whispered, "What happens now?" I stood looking at him. Not with hatred, but with something deeper, steadier. Now, I said, you decide if you want to rebuild what's left, or keep pretending it's broken. He didn't answer. He just stared at the rain, his reflection faint in the window, fractured, shimmering, fading in and out of view. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door he spoke again, voice hoarse, cracked. Emma. I stopped. Do you still play? He asked. I turned slightly. Every day. He nodded once. Then quieter. Good. Outside, the rain had softened into a hush, like the world exhaling. I walked down the porch steps and into the gray light, feeling something uncoil inside me. Not triumph, not victory, but release. The truth was no longer a blade in my hands. It was a song, and at last I was free to play it. 2 months later, the piano came home, not to the Hartwell house but to mine. It arrived on a damp morning in late March, swaddled in soft gray cloth, its polished mahogany gleaming even under the overcast sky. I watched from the porch as the movers eased it through the doorway, their shoes squeaking on the wet floorboards. Careful, I said instinctively. They nodded, reverent as priests carrying a relic. When they left, the house fell quiet, just me and the piano, the heart of a story that had almost been erased. I stood there for a long time, staring at it like an old friend returned from war. The 1925 Steinway Model M, my grandfather's pride. Its surface was restored, its strings revoiced, its soundboard newly alive. The faint scratch above middle C was still there, the one I'd made when I was 13 and nervous before my first recital. Somehow that imperfection made it feel even more mine. I lifted the lid, pressing one key gently. The note hung in the air, clean, resonant, with a kind of warmth that went beyond sound. Felt like forgiveness. For a week I didn't tell anyone. I just played. Morning, evening, midnight. Hours blurred into scales, sonatas, and silent tears. The piano filled every room, chasing out the ghosts that had lived there for too long. Sophie stopped by one afternoon for her lesson, carrying a thermos of hot cocoa and her music books. Her eyes widened when she saw the instrument. Miss Hartwell, she whispered. Is that the piano? I smiled. Yes. She's back. Sophie set her things down carefully. Can I hear you play first? I hesitated, then nodded. My hands found the keys almost on their own, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. I played Chopin's Nocturne in E minor. The piece Grandpa had taught me one winter evening when the power had gone out, and we'd sat by candlelight while snow brushed the windows. He'd said, "Listen to the pauses, Emma. The music lives between them." As I reached the final chord, the room felt different, lighter somehow. Sophie clapped softly, eyes bright. "That was," she started, then trailed off. I smiled. "It's okay. Some things don't need words." After she left, I made tea and sat by the piano with my journal. On the first page, I wrote 3 sentences. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. And still choosing to play. That night, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Spring had just begun. The air smelled of wet earth and lilacs. As I passed the old house where Jake still lived, I saw the porch light flicker on. His silhouette appeared briefly behind the curtains, holding something. Maybe a photo, maybe nothing. For a second, I almost knocked. But some doors don't need reopening. Some silences are their own kind of peace. Back home, I found myself standing at the piano again. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, pale and trembling across the keys. I sat, closed my eyes, and began to play something new. Not Bach or Chopin or anything written before. It started as a whisper, a few hesitant notes that slowly found their rhythm. Then a melody, fragile, unsteady, began to rise. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Halfway through, I realized I was smiling. By the time the last note faded, dawn had begun to bleed across the sky. The first birds were waking. The city outside was stirring back to life. I leaned my forehead against the piano lid and whispered, "Thank you. For the music. For the pain. For the truth." The revenge had never been about destroying Jake. It had been about reclaiming what was mine, my voice, my story, my inheritance of sound. And I had done that, one note at a time. When I finally stood and looked out the window, the light was soft gold. The kind that forgives everything it touches. For the first time in years, I felt not victorious but whole. There's something about an empty concert hall before the lights come up. The air feels different, like it remembers every note ever played there, still trembling softly in the rafters. 3 months after getting the Steinway back, I stood on the stage of the small community theater downtown. The seats were mostly empty. A few students, some friends, the kind of audience that doesn't expect perfection. I ran my hand along the smooth curve of the piano, feeling the warmth of the wood under my palm. The same hands that had once clenched in anger now rested easily, peacefully. When I pressed the first key, the sound rippled through the room. Rich, deep, whole. It filled every corner. Not loud but certain. I let my eyes close and breathed in the moment. I thought of Grandpa, of his hands guiding mine when I was small, of his laugh when I hit a wrong note, of the way he'd always said, "Music tells the truth faster than words ever can." He was right. It had taken losing everything to understand what he meant. The truth wasn't in the confrontation or the documents or even in exposing Jake's betrayal. It was here, in the echo of the piano that should have been lost forever, still singing. I played until the last chord lingered and dissolved into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sophie, dear, determined Sophie, stood and started to clap, her little hands making the sound that broke the quiet. Others followed. The applause rose, small but genuine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was performing for anyone. I was simply being heard. When the lights dimmed and the audience drifted away, I stayed behind a while longer. The piano gleamed in the low glow of the stage lamps, a survivor like me. As I closed the lid, I saw my reflection faintly in its polished surface. Not the tired, grieving woman I'd once been, but someone steadier. Someone who had learned that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just plays. And in that quiet music, truth lives on.